Hi, good afternoon.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well. Good to see you, Chris. I am just adding the rest of our guests for today, but thank you to everyone that's joined. Welcome to National Urban League's Justice Now. Hi, Kalila. How are you?
Hi, good, and yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for National Urban League's Justice Now conversation. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
We are just waiting for one more guest for today's show, but we are extremely excited to be talking about police and schools. So let me.
How's it out there on the West Coast? Ain't that where you at, Kalia?
Yeah, sorry.
It's all right.
It's hot, but not too bad.
All right. Yeah, I'm on the other side. I'm all the way in Philadelphia.
Ooh,
Well, at least the weather is pretty warm on the East Coast as well. Usually, Kalila, I would be very jealous of you, but I think our weather is pretty good right now. So just looking out for our last guest. But thank you, everyone, so much for joining us this afternoon or early evening, depending on where you are. Um, we are going to get started, and I will keep an eye out for Crystal. Um, but for everyone that's joined us, I am Jerica Richardson. I am the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. And I am the host of the National Urban League's IG Live called Justice Now, where we delve into a whole host of social justice issues that are happening in this country and have real conversations with folks that are doing the work on the ground, folks that are working in our halls of government, our activists, our academics. We just think this is a great opportunity to have a really robust conversation on some issues that really are impacting our community. So with me today, I have Kalila Williams, who is an activist and organizer based out of LA, and she is part of Students Deserve. Kalila, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, glad to have you here. And I just saw our last guest, so she will be hopefully joining us shortly. Hey, Crystal.
Hi there.
Hey, good to see you.
Sorry I'm
Uh,
late.
oh, no worries, no worries. We are just getting started. And then I have Christopher Rogers, who is a graduate student and organizer for Police Free Pen, who has joined us as well. Chris, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation today.
Thanks for the invitation. Shout out my Urban League Philadelphia chapter. A lot of love.
Oh yeah, they are doing the work in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Probably such a strong affiliate, and we're just so proud of the work that they've been doing in a whole host of areas, including democracy and civic engagement, and the it spans the gamut on social justice. And finally, last but not least, we have Crystal Hudson, who I full disclosure, who is a graduate of Spelman College, my Spelman sister. We are just
Yes.
so proud of her. Crystal has been an activist. She's a public servant, a community organizer. She's worked in and out of government. And she really just had a historic primary in New York City. And she's a Democratic nominee for New York City Council District 35. Crystal, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited for the conversation.
Great. Well, why don't we jump right on in? I will say the National Urban League in April released our 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust. And one of those pillars really focused on removing police from schools. Now, we know there is really a movement that's sweeping across the country focused on reimagining public safety and policing and what that looks like. But I think one of the critical components really involves young people. And I think we saw from the death of George Floyd and multiple pandemics and the uprising that just really occurred in this country, so much of it really was driven, and that awakening that happened in this country really came as a result of the activism of young people. And so I thought it was really important that we had this conversation around policing in schools to discuss what impact policing actually has on young folks, especially in the school system. So I would love to start out with Kalila, who is in LA. Can you tell us a little bit about students deserve and how you got involved in this movement? I'm really curious for you to share with our viewers how you went from just being a student and really going into the organizing mode and really educating yourself on this critical issue.
Yeah, of course. So I joined Students Deserve last year around the time that the order was first put in place, and we were just finding out about like COVID. And it was when we had started our COVID-19 demand. About it through my teacher. It was like, hey, I think you'd be perfect for this organization. They're having a general assembly. I think you should join if you would be interested. So when I joined the general assembly, we were talking about our COVID-19 demands, which was like universal passage for all students. Focused on like getting students who were still adjusting to the transition of being virtual. To make sure that they would still pass their classes and wouldn't fail, because we still don't know much about online learning, as well as police and ice-free distribution zones, making sure that there's nothing that our students have to worry about going to get food. And then we also had other different demands, and then slowly the work actually very quickly the work progressed to the defunding of the school police movement. And that was really centered, of course, around the incident that happened with George Floyd, as well as this was work that we've wanted to do for a while. We ended random searches back in 2019, and that was kind of our stepping stone to defunding the school police, because we really started to think about, well, what's the next steps that we can take in order to make sure that our students are safe on campuses. And we knew that the next step was getting police off campus, but it wasn't really a thought in anybody's mind until last year. Like, nobody was really believing that this was a possibility that could happen. So last year we started the police movement, and things escalated pretty quickly. In June, we got our school board to defund the school police by 25, which is 30%. And this was a historic victory for us, because this is something that we've wanted for a while, but it was also the largest cut ever made to school police. So we knew that this was a huge victory, but there was still more work to come, because we needed to make sure that, of course, that money was reinvested into Black students, because that's what we wanted it for. We wanted that the money that we spend on policing Black students who are targeted more than their population in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, we represent 8% of the population, and we're 25% of the school police interaction. So we knew that we had to make sure that money got invested into Black students. And so we worked around the clock with the school board and tried to get the members to push an amendment during one of the school board meetings. And officially on February 16th of 2021, the school board voted to remove all cops from campus. They voted to put a ban on pepper spray. Pepper spray was legalized to use on students. We are children, and they were pepper spray us. And there was actually 7 different instances in 7 different high schools across LA County where students were getting pepper sprayed. And this was really traumatic for a lot of students. So we got the ban on pepper spray, and we also got $25 million invested into Black students with an additional $11 million, so $33 million invested in Black student achievement, which was a huge victory for us.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, we were super excited. And then recently, just about 2 weeks ago, we got $6.7 million invested into Black students. So we went from having $0 invested into a Black student. There was no Black student achievement plan. There was no look at restorative justice. There was no look at mental health services. And now we're seeing a new year where students will come onto campus, not having cops on campus, but restorative justice instead. Having, instead of full-time police officers, full-time nurses, full-time academic counselors, psychiatric social workers, people that will better well-being, and focus on us as students collectively and wholly instead of targeting us, especially Black students. So that, that's really huge. That's really big victories for us, and we're super excited.
Thank you so much for laying all of that out, Kalila. I mean, you really have created a blueprint on the West Coast that can be emulated in other places. And I think it was really good to hear the perspective from you as a high school student. I think one of the things I have observed in my work in New York City, we've had numerous conversations over the past few years about the impact of law enforcement, school safety agents, and security in schools. Hearing directly from New York City kids, one of the things that I heard when we asked the students themselves was the assumption by adults that metal detectors, police officers, that would make students feel safer. And I think the response for them was no, it was having the adverse effect, right? It was causing more trauma, more concern, had them uneasy, and they felt like there should be more of an investment in some of the social services that you talked about. They felt like there needed to be more guidance counselors in schools. And even when we hear stories of kids in kindergarten being put in plastic handcuffs, it really is damaging the psyche of young people. So I would love to go from the West Coast to New York City and then on to Philadelphia. And I would love to hear from you, Crystal, as you embark and gear up and think about the next legislative session and cycle here in New York City. Earlier in the year and post George Floyd, there was the conversation of moving the oversight of school safety officers from the NYPD to the Department of Education. And my question to you is that enough? Because I think there are some in the community that changing budget lines may not change the overall impact of some of the issues that we've already lifted up earlier.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what we don't want to see is school safety officers just switching from one agency to another. What we do want to see is police out of our schools, which is obviously what this whole conversation is about. Our school safety division budget is $243 million, which is the 5th largest police force in the country, just in our school system. And we also need to recognize, of course, that the majority of the force are Black and brown women predominantly. And so we need to ensure a just transition into non-law enforcement union jobs, but we don't want to see those folks policing our students and over-policing, quite frankly. I think the statistics here in New York are, Black girls are 5 times more likely than their white counterparts to be suspended at least once from school. They're 7 times more likely to receive multiple out-of-school suspensions than their white counterparts, and 3 times more likely to receive referrals to law enforcement. And, as a Black girl myself growing up, I was over-disciplined. And actually, it wasn't until I got to Spelman that I realized what I had experienced in elementary school and middle school was racialized. You know, I thought for a long time that I was just not doing the thing that I should have been doing. And, you know, Spelman helped me to realize and understand all the systems in which are, you know, that are at play, you know, in all facets of our life, right? Not just in our schools, but also in the workplace and at home. If you live in public housing, you know, law enforcement is ever present. And so, you know, it's vitally important. And I'm so inspired by Kalila, the work that you've been doing out in LA. And like Jerica said, I mean, that is a true blueprint that you all have laid out for those of us in other parts of the country to follow your lead. And I think, you know, following quite literally the lead of Black girls, young Black folks who are in school, who know what it's like to be over policed and over disciplined, and who don't want to have that experience in their school buildings anymore. And so I commend you and organizations here in Brooklyn like Girls for Gender Equity and Make the Road New York that I know have been doing a lot of work to make our schools police free.
Thank you so much for that, Crystal. I think one of the important points that you lifted up was calling out the fact that these issues are part of systems, and they are systems within systems. And I think one of the things I think about when we're talking about public safety, we're talking about police in our schools, is the school to prison pipeline. We see it on the lower level, we see it in high school, but I would love to hear from you, Christopher, about what the experience has been like for you organizing at Penn in a collegiate atmosphere, because we recognize so many of folks from our community, from Black and Brown communities, other marginalized communities, getting to college is such a huge accomplishment, right? It's what we strive and we tell our kids to do. We put the emphasis and focus on education. But then so many of them, when they are in that space, have interactions, whether when they're at school, when they're home from school, that can fundamentally alter their life and their trajectory. Tell us a little bit more about your work, what the movement is like in Pennsylvania, and really how we can engage on this issue on the collegiate level and beyond.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I also have some inroads into the K-12 system through my work with Black Lives Matter at school. And we were, you know, proud to partner with Students Deserve and the LA teachers for a while. But I'll stick to my campus work. You know, all this work is connected. We're all
Oh,
in
you can incorporate Black Lives Matter. I think everyone, I think the four of us I think we can agree that we all are supportive of that movement and that work. It has been a catalyst.
Yes, yes, yes. So I'm in Philadelphia. There's dirt bikes everywhere. But so the work of Police Free Penn really started, you know, in midsummer last year. Just really building off the energy that we felt that was really rising from the Black communities here in Philadelphia. And Penn is the wealthiest institution within the city, one of the, you know, largest private employers across the state of Pennsylvania, and they have the third largest private police force in the country, the number one private police force in size across the state of Pennsylvania. And in particular, there was one, you know, sort of like catalyzing moment on May 31st here in Philadelphia. There was a huge site of police repression that is still under investigation by the United Nations that happened on 52nd Street, which is like the main street of Black West Philadelphia. There was, you know, tear gas being spread into residential neighborhoods of families, children who were, you know, harmed, people who had pre-existing conditions already being harmed by those gases, and also rubber bullets being shot at children that were out out in public that day. So that moment really brought us together to think about that. It was not just the city of Philadelphia police who were there that day. There was the University of Pennsylvania police. There was the Drexel University police. There was the Housing Authority police who are, you know, connected to this. There's the SEPTA Transit Authority police. So particularly in our metropolitan areas, there are, and just as we talk about like the different jurisdictions that police forces are under. There is a confluence of these multiple sort of like sites in which police are funded, and it comes from a lot of different spaces. Even some of our sort of like corporate funders are funding police and the police foundation to purchase things like SWAT weapons, which the University of Pennsylvania has done. So it was really up to us as students to not think about just how we transform what it's like on campus, in particular for students who might have like the access cards to buildings and things like that, or for Black workers on campus. But think about the role of these universities and its relationship to forwarding a sort of like police agenda across the city. So not only were we thinking about the interactions of Black students here on campus, but also thinking about the ways that Penn Police interacts with our houseless population around Philadelphia, the ways in which this displacement, which is caused around the sort of like housing markets and student rents, and the ways that this university and its sort of like police mechanism kind of defends displacement, and seeing the ways that the Black population has been sort of like pushed out of West Philadelphia. And so thinking of not only the role of police and the role of like police brutality or police abuse of power, but the role that policing serves in really backing up, gentrification and displacement, and the role of university research in particular that sort of like reinforces the power of police. We have professors such as Richard Burke, who's sort of designed algorithms that determine whether people get to go home through sort of like bail or parole. These racist algorithms, right? They come out of university research. So the work that we do at Police Free Penn is really thinking, one, yes, about how we defund the police, right? We have demands around that, but also thinking about the ways that our universities are interconnected into our entire city's sort of like economic or exploitative economics of our cities, right? And how these big wealthy institutions have a responsibility to that. So just to name some of our wins, we were part of a coalition that really pushed the university to for a 10-year commitment of $100 million that will go into our schools, which have been dealing with the brunt of environmental racism and toxic infrastructure for years. So we saw that commitment, but it's certainly not enough, because if the University of Pennsylvania was taxed the way it was supposed to, that wouldn't have been 100 million. It would have been 250 million going into our schools. So the way that we look at the role of policing is kind of taking a step back from the one-to-one interactions that we see and thinking of the structure of policing in totality and seeing what opportunities for organizing come with that. So we see ourselves as bridges to local abolition work. I definitely got to give a shout out to the Black Philly Radical Collective, who's really leading the groundswell of work here in the city and really lifting up the ways that our universities and our campuses are complicit. So at the university level, that is the work I do. But I also sit on the board of the Philadelphia Student Union, who's a proud member of the Alliance for Educational Justice, partners with folks like the Students Deserve LA, and seeing this police-free schools movement really take off nationwide. So the students, the K-12 students here are also leading a campaign for police-free schools, and had what they faced last year in response was the school board decided to rename, right? We're going to rename the police officers. Police in school sounds, so we're going to call them ambassadors. But they're still, cops in our schools, right? They're going to change the uniform, right? So the work of the students has really been pushing for substantive changes and not just the symbolism and rhetoric that doesn't get to the heart of the issue.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. We definitely have to get beyond semantics and get to the heart of this issue. And I think one of the points that you really raised around education is key. Why are we not spending that investment in time and research into thinking about creative, community-focused ways to improve public safety? So, Crystal, I'd love to come back to you. We've heard the different perspectives all the way from what's happening on the K to 12 level, as well as what's happening in the undergraduate and graduate levels. You know, I know there are so many lawmakers across the country who are picking up the phone, they're looking at their community and they're looking at activists, they're trying to respond to the call for change and a very different system than the one that we currently have in place. What advice do you have to other folks that are working in government and policy and lawmakers in pursuing change in this area?
I think we have to keep fighting to defund, our police departments all across the country, and follow Black girls, follow our young people. Those, I think it was Ayanna Pressley who said, those closest to the power, those closest to the pain should be closest to the power, right? So we know that our young people, our students, and particularly our Black girls are the ones experiencing over policing and over discipline in our schools. So we should be following them. And Kalila is a perfect example of, what happens when we actually follow them, right? Like they can actually get the things done that we keep talking about. But I think also defunding our police departments is key. And we, here in New York, we haven't been successful yet. But I think as long as we continue to push our messaging, I've met so many people across all different demographics, races, ethnicities, ages, who think they don't want to defund the NYPD. And the example that I always use is if we put ourselves back in the middle of last summer, at the height of the pandemic, the height of the peaceful protests here in New York City, we look at, the response by the NYPD for peaceful protesters was, use of tasers, guns, batons, drones, SUVs, bicycles, shields. They had every tool and more for peaceful protesters, right? And in our hospital system, particularly our public hospitals, our healthcare providers did not have access to the PPE they needed. They didn't have access to ventilators. They were overworked, understaffed, under-resourced. And if we think that the future is continuing to fund and overfund police departments and not fund our public hospitals, our public schools, and our public housing, then we're going to have a future that doesn't work for any of us. And so I think that is, what resonates with people is understanding the ways in which we need to invest in our communities. And I think also decoupling public safety from policing. A lot of people think and assume that public safety means inherently more police, and it doesn't. We know the things that keep our community safe, and that's access to a quality education, access to quality healthcare, culturally competent healthcare, access to safe and affordable housing, access to good jobs with good wages, union jobs. Those are the things that keep our communities safe. And so I think as long as we continue to fight and to push our message, and to do the work, to organize, to get people to understand what community safety means, what public safety means, and how we can achieve it. It's hard for people to envision a future when they've never seen it, And so understanding what it means to have police-free schools, when, to your earlier point, there are students being told quite literally that metal detectors will keep them safe, that police officers present in their schools will keep them safe. But when they're walking home at night from school, police officers are the ones stopping and frisking them, and accosting them and killing them. So I think we need to remain diligent in the fight, remain diligent in our messaging, and just keep up the fight. And like I said, follow the young people, and particularly Black girls.
Thank you so much for that, Crystal. And thank you for unpacking, right, some of these really deep terms that sometimes people have a negative, for lack of a better term, reaction to. They hear defund, and then they miss, I think, what the context is and what the call to action is. And that really, you reiterated it, and Kalila and Chris talked about it. It's investing in our communities and thinking of other ways to support our folks, redefining what public safety is. And so I always think it's important, as we are kind of coming to a close, for us to share information with others. And so, Kalila, I would love for you just to share a few words, to other young people, other people that are young at heart, like myself. Sometimes I like to
And
think,
me.
yeah, I got a couple years on you, Crystal, but yes. What can folks that really are interested in getting involved in this movement do, first and foremost, to educate themselves? And are there resources or organizations that they can reach out to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I just encourage everyone, just especially if you're a young person and you really want to speak up, but you're afraid to, just do it. Don't be afraid to. We know that, anytime within society something goes against the norm, you're going to get shut down. But that doesn't mean that you don't continue the work that you're doing. Slavery was normalized, but that doesn't mean it was okay. Pro laws were normalized, but that doesn't mean it's okay. But people took the people spoke up about it, and we're slowly progressing within society. And so now is your time. Now is the time to change. So speak up about it. Join organizations. If you're in LA, reach out to Students Deserve or Black Lives Matter Youth Vanguard. There's so many other organizations, Black Lives Matter group all over. We have different organizations that are call right now that you can simply join. If you're take place in one of those states or cities. So just it requires you to do the work, though. It requires you to look it up. It requires you to really put in the effort, really work. So just really put your bootstraps on and let's go.
So thank you for that, Kalila. I saw a question in the chat. They asked, are you going to continue to do this work when you go to college? So congratulations. I know you're headed there. It sounds like yes, but if you could just answer for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already attending UCLA in the fall, and so, I've already been connecting with the No UC Coalition. So we're actually going to get police on the University of California campuses.
Awesome. I love it. And Chris, I'm going to ask you a similar question, but slightly different. For folks that are in the movement and doing the work, any advice to how you deal with the pushback sometimes that, inevitably you may receive on campus from the administration? Because I think that's sometimes the fear that stops people from engaging and getting involved in the movement, worried about consequences and repercussions for them on, in their educational career. Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is a quote from Kalamu Yasalam, who's an amazing poet, writer, organizer out of New Orleans. And he says, don't fall in love with the fighting. Fall in love with the people. Right? So focus your energies on organizing for the people. When we're having this discussion of what it means to be safe, what it means to protect one another, think about that. Build communities around that. Practice police-free strategies within your communities to show that it's possible, right? And use that to really empower what you're doing as organizing. So when you just focus on, the people who are there to manage your oppression, so to speak, of course they don't want to hear you. Their job depends on not hearing you. So use your heart and your energy to focus on those people around you, to focus on your community, because wherever there is people, there is power. So really, focus on the people. And I want to give some, resource shout outs too. I think first of all, we mentioned Ayanna Pressley. I really encourage everyone to look up the Push Out Act that she hosted, that was, came out of work through Monique Morris and the African American Policy Forum. It is an amazing piece of federal legislation that could be adapted for states as well, to think about what it really means to transform school environments. Also, got to give a shout out to WeCameToLearn.com. It was a project through the Advancement Project alongside Alliance for Educational Justice. It is a toolkit and a history guide that teaches K to 12 students how to organize for police-free schools. It features a ton of information, a ton of questions that you can use to start study groups and really just build that work into their community. So I got to give a shout out to WeCameToLearn.com. And I also have to give a shout out for the campus side, the Cops Off Campus Coalition. Kalila already mentioned the UC folks out there at UCLA. The whole UC system is going hard. So please look up the Cops Off Campus Coalition to see how schools across the country, universities across this country, are really organizing to create police-free campuses, and realize our, student power and our, even a number of faculty members as well, to realize their power in advancing this struggle. So, Cops Off Campus, WeCameToLearn.com, and the Push Out Act. Just a couple of things I definitely wanted to mention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources. Love Congresswoman Presley. She is doing her thing and such an inspiration to so many of us in this work. And so, Crystal, I would love to give you the last word and have you close us out. I think it's been really great to hear your voice and to hear you lift up so many important issues in our community. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes people are not receptive to change. And, I think we're so excited about the diversity of ideas, diversity of thought that you bring. And I think many times I struggle and feel like political courage is in short supply in so many of our institutions in government. So please feel free to give us some closing remarks and words on this issue, any resources you want to share, or any just inspirational words for our viewers today.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the one of the biggest things for me is understanding what a real recovery coming out of not just the pandemic, but the economy, the racial reckoning we've seen all across this country, what that really looks like and what it means to actually center those of us with the greatest needs and those of us who are most marginalized. So, I launched a Black agenda for New York City back in February during Black History Month, which essentially lays out a blueprint for how I know local government is uniquely positioned to actually start to undo and address all of the really racist and in particular anti-Black policies, practices, and laws that we have on the books. I think, everybody has talked about these systems, right? And we know that there were people who came before us who didn't look like us, who put these laws in place and put these policies into practice. And so it takes us with the political courage and the will to actually undo those things, it's possible. It's just that it hasn't been done before and people don't want to talk about it. I think people oftentimes also don't want to talk about Black people. They don't want to talk about Black people explicitly because it's not easy to always talk about Black people. And so I think whatever opportunity we have to continue to talk about Black people, Black trans women in particular, undocumented Black immigrants, when we're talking about, immigrant justice, we have to center those of us with the greatest needs and those of us who are most marginalized. And I think if we can do that and we can continue to be unafraid and unapologetic about talking about and centering and prioritizing Black people, then we'll see a world in which Black people can not just survive, but truly, truly thrive.
Thank you so much for that. We clearly need to make sure we always underscore the diversity of our movement, the diversity of the Black diaspora in our community. There are so many voices, and we need to make sure that all Black voices are lifted up in this struggle, and that we don't even marginalize within our community. I think that's critically important. And I want to thank you all for joining us because it was really great and I think important for us to highlight work that is happening on the state and local level, on the ground, across the country, because I think so often we can focus on what's happening in Washington. And don't get me wrong, it's critically important. But more often than not, you have the ability to really push for reforms on the state and local level that will fundamentally change all of our lives. So I just encourage everyone that's tuned in today to take a look at the National Urban League's 21 Pillars for Redefining Public Safety and Restoring Community Trust. This was one piece of it, but there's many more. And we just issued our toolkit which is packed with legislation and policy sample examples of what's happening across the country that you can take a look at and really pursue and tailor to fit where you live. I think we're all in this work together, and just want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Justice Now. And just a reminder to everyone, the time for justice is always now. Thank you all so much for joining us. It was such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, you all. Take care.
Take care. Be well.
Shout out to Paul Robeson House.
Shout out. Thank you all. Take care.